Good morning, HealthSpaces. It's a pleasure to be with y'all today. I've spoken to y'all a few times before, and so you may be used to my style of presentation if you've seen me, which is to have lots and lots of slides. If you look at the bottom, you can see I have 178 slides. So let's get started. My topic today is about how different institutions in healthcare are going to be affecting where healthcare is delivered. And what I want to frame my remarks around is something called the ThreeBody Problem, which is a fantastic book, and it's going to be a series on Netflix, actually. But what the ThreeBody Problem is, it's a problem in physics, where if you have two gravitational bodies that are orbiting, let's say the Earth and the Moon, and you're trying to decide where they're going to be at any point in time, if you just have two, the Earth and the Moon, it's fairly easy to determine a formula which will show you where they're going to be at any point in time. However, when you add a third body into the equation, let's say Mars, it becomes nearly impossible to accurately determine where things are going to be at any point in time. And this is a good analogy for healthcare. By the way, if Saturn went off its orbit by 1 kilometer, it would throw off the entire orbital system of the solar system. So that's sort of an illustration of the three-body problem. Anyway, it used to be that healthcare was delivered in the home by a doctor coming to your house. In fact, in 1940, 40% of all healthcare interactions were in the home. By 1980, that was really just 1%. Things had moved from patient-doctor interactions, two bodies, to patient-doctor and an institution, hospital or an office, a facility where healthcare was being delivered. All right, and then a fourth body got involved in it, the payor, which tended to affect things even more and make things even more unpredictable. And within the payor orbit were three orbits of patients, insurance, and the government, the payers. So things are really complex in healthcare. The way healthcare has been delivered mostly during the last few years, though, has been in a hospital or a doctor's office. This is my hospital in Augusta, Georgia, University Hospital. And what's interesting to me is if you take CDC data from 1975 to 2015, if you look on that top row, the number of hospitals has decreased from 7,100 to 5,500. But if you look at number of beds, the number of facilities that have 6 to 24 beds has nearly doubled from 299 to 499. Everywhere else they've gone down, except at the bottom, 500 bed institutions decreased for a while to 2005, but have then been decreasing. So the small got bigger and the really big got bigger. And one thing that is causing that to happen is the fact that healthcare institutions are now data institutions. It used to be that healthcare data was kept on a 3x5 card or on paper files. Then the data was siloed in an EHR within the hospital on the hospital's own servers. Then we got to the cloud. And the cloud is what is attracting the attention of other outside orbital bodies into healthcare because they want access to that data. Data has tremendous value in today's world. And the data that exists in the cloud now is interchangeable because of something called the FHIR standard, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource Standard, which is sort of like in the old days, allowing WordPerfect files to talk to Microsoft Word files. This lets different EHRs talk to each other. And all this data that's coming in, I've spoken to y'all before on ambient intelligence, all this data that's coming in now can be given context, all this data from different places, much as when you wear a magic band at Disney World, it has information on what rides you ride, where you go, you can pay from it, you can do all sorts of things from it, and all that data is aggregated by Disney and they build a profile on you. This is occurring in healthcare now. They're building a profile on you, hopefully for your own good. But hospitals are becoming a treasure trove of this data due to existing and upcoming sources of data. And this is where the data is going to all be coming from, lots of different places. But the important thing is now we're able to make sense of that data. And in an average patient interaction at a hospital, one study showed there's more than 200,000 pieces of data generated that go into an electronic healthcare record. Now, why is all this data valuable? Because it allows people to know exactly what your health conditions are, or in a general sense, it allows you to be monetized. You have to ask yourself the question, why is Facebook worth $775 billion right now? You don't subscribe to Facebook. Why is it worth that much money? Because of the data. So you have the patient, you have the existing institutions, and then you have big data as the third body part of our third body problem. I'm going to talk about some companies that are really looking at healthcare now. There was a study done recently, a poll done, where people thought that Google was going to have the biggest influence on healthcare. Well, here's what I actually think is going to be the case. Google less so than Apple, Amazon, and surprisingly, the one that's not on there is Walmart. But in the context of these companies, healthcare is the only business that's big enough to move the needle for their earnings. For instance, if you're Apple and you're worth $2 trillion, you can't go into a business that's only going to make you, $1 billion. You have to go into something much, much larger than that. But let's go from least impactful to most impactful of the larger companies. Let's start with Google. Google already is a huge, huge healthcare resource. You just don't think of it that way. But 7% of their daily searches are healthcare related, and it receives around 1 billion healthcare questions every day. So in a real sense, Google is acting almost as a virtual doctor as it is. It's almost a telehealth system in and of itself. And this is part and parcel of what Google Health's plan is. They want to be the search engine for individuals at home looking for healthcare, but they also want their search bar to live on top of an EHR system that a doctor is looking at, so that they can control those searches and have access to that data also. Google also has developed TensorFlow, which is the largest machine learning platform in the world. And that's one big part of their contribution to healthcare. Here's a great chart that shows how they're entering healthcare, but these are the ones that are important. The cloud and these two companies, DeepMind and Verily, and I'm going to talk about that. One thing in the cloud, you saw a company called Apogee. Apogee, remember I talked about the FHIR interoperability standard. Well, Apogee is Google's attempt to control that market. They want to be sort of the pipe fitting that all the information has to flow through so that they can gather and interpret it. Their company Verily is the one that will be interpreting it. They say our work is dedicated to collecting, organize, and activating health information, which is an interesting word. But what they're doing, their big mission right now, is working with hospitals as hospitals go from volume-based healthcare to value-based or capitation-based healthcare. They want to be right in the middle of that, offering up their machine learning as a solution. One example of this is something they have going on called Project Baseline, which volunteers are gathering data on their own and submitting it to Google, so Google can try and determine what actually is good health. Is good health what we think it is now? Well, people are contributing their daily data, their genetic data, they're saying what they eat, and Project Baseline is trying to determine a baseline for what good healthcare actually is. And one important part of this that's happened in the last year is Google has bought Fitbit and raised the price. But Google has bought Fitbit and it does more things than it used to do. But there's a reason they spent $2 billion on this. And one example of an application that can be used by all these devices is they found that a Fitbit was able to detect almost 50% of COVID-19 patients one day before users reported having symptoms. So by aggregating all this data and using predictive analytics, the Fitbit, in conjunction with Apple's analytics, is able to predict COVID, which is pretty strong. These are some of Google's projects right now, but Google is essentially working right now and influencing hospital-based healthcare, especially with pushing people into the cloud, pushing records in the cloud. Mayo Clinic, in fact, is using them a lot. So Google is part of that big data third body that we're talking about. The next is Apple, and Apple pretty much fascinates me in this area. And as I mentioned earlier, they have to get into healthcare. They're a $2 trillion business. They need to be in a business that moves the needle, which would be a $3 trillion business called U.S. healthcare. And they're doing this as they move from hardware to services. Next year, their estimated healthcare revenue is $13 billion. In 2027, it's $300 billion, which is roughly equivalent to all their revenue right now. Tim Cook has said the future of Apple is in healthcare. That's what they're going to be remembered for. And of course, it's centering completely around the iPhone right now, on which Apple is trying also, like Google, to be the person that controls the fire standard, or one of the strong determinants of the fire standard. What Apple wants to do is measure information on you and from your EHR record, aggregate it and interpret it, which is exactly what Google is trying to do. So Apple has been, they started slow in 2019 with about 39 hospitals that were working with them, but they've gathered more hospitals to work with their EHR data, and then Apple feeds that EHR data into their programming stack, which they then share with app developers. An example of how Apple is working with hospitals is in post-op care. For instance, at University of Virginia, when a child can be let out of the neonatal unit early and be monitored at home, which is great, and that the child is home, but it's also great and that that frees up another bed in the neonatal unit if need be. And this monitoring information is then shared back in real time with the hospital as if the child were there at the moment. Post-op for adults is also another big area that Apple is working with hospitals on by using the watch in large sense. And what they're doing, it's very interesting. When you have an operation, if you've ever had one, you know, they try and get you up and walking as quickly as you can. There's something called the 6-minute walk test, and that turns out to be a great gauge of post-operative and general health. And Apple has now added onto their devices a way to measure walking quality over time as a unit of health and report this back. So they measure your speed, how long your steps are. If your steps are shorter, you're more unsure of your steps, and whether or not your walking asymmetry between your left and right foot is the same, which is another gauge of balance and how you're doing. And obviously, if you're walking faster and longer, then that's measured also and reported back, and it's a good thing. The Apple Watch is really the key to Apple's healthcare future, and I believe their future in general, because I believe the watch, most of the watch's functions are most of the iPhone's functions are going to move right down onto the watch. It can measure VO2 max now. It can measure oxygen saturation, and it'll issue an alert if it's low. It monitors your heart rate and will let you know if it thinks you're in AFib, and it will also send a PDF to your doctor if it thinks you're in AFib. It'll monitor sound levels and warn you if they are too high. It can tell whether or not you've fallen, and if you don't respond after the fall, it will summon emergency services. It tracks your sleep. It detects hand washing. It tracks your daily physical exercise, and you can pay for stuff at Costco with it. The watch is central to what Apple's doing. One of the great researchers on Apple is at a company called Asimco, and he said the watch has taken on the job of health monitorer and health preserver. And it's the key to what Apple is doing, along with the AirPods. This is the sleeper. Apple's been putting out patents year after year on this, and we've been wondering what's going on. And what's happening is it's also going to be a health sensor in conjunction with your watch. They figured out an algorithm to where they can measure your blood pressure using something called pulse waveform analysis with AirPods. So, well, and then it'll measure your heart rate also. So between your AirPods and your Apple Watch, you can see your heart rate, your ECG, your blood pressure, your temperature, fall detection, blood oxygen, gait analysis, the walking analysis, and it'll act as a hearing aid for less than $500, this and this, not including your phone. You telling me insurance companies wouldn't be willing to pay for that, to have access to that kind of information? Of course they would, and they're going to. One interesting thing also is there's something new with the AirPods called Live Listen, which, for instance, if you're walking in a place where there's lots of traffic, it understands the sound of traffic and will filter it out so you can hear what's important. But there are theories that it can also recognize voices. So if you wanted to, in theory, in the future, you'd be able to tune out somebody's voice in a room. That's awesome and much needed, at least for me. So Apple is all about taking healthcare data and controlling it, as Google is, and Apple is more trusted than Google in terms of privacy, so they may have an edge in this. Speaking of privacy, if you share your health data with the Singaporean government right now, they'll actually pay you to have good health habits, up to $280. That's the future, is either being paid for good health habits or your health insurance being decreased if they know that you have good health habits. No accident last week when Apple had their iPhone event that they concentrated so hard on 5G data, because a world or a national network of 5G, really fast data transmission, enables all these healthcare things that they're trying to do. So Apple, as part of our ThreeBody Problem, Apple is pushing things more to the home, sort of back into the home, which is interesting, from institutions back into the home. There was a interview recently in Becker's Healthcare where the question was, the 10 hospitals exec predict the biggest tech retail disruptors in healthcare. And I made a word cloud of it. And number 2 was Amazon, number 1 was Walmart. So let's look at number 2 right now. Amazon. Amazon, everybody is Amazon customers. There's 100 million Prime customers, 310 million customers. They also have data to 1.2 million employees through their partnership, their healthcare partnership with JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway, which is how they're going to try and enter healthcare, employer healthcare. Amazon's logistics are getting stronger and stronger. They now can deliver within a day something to 77 million people in the United States, and they're within 10 miles of 164 million Americans if you take a Whole Foods or a distribution center. Amazon is all about big data. They're probably the biggest data company outside of Google. But what's interesting is that's also where their profit comes from. And this Amazon Web Services ecosystem gives them the cash to try things that other companies can't try because they can afford to experiment. One of their experiments is in pharmaceuticals. They bought PillPack for $1 billion, which I think is going to be one of the greatest healthcare bargains in history. And it gave them immediately access to lots of data and gave them licenses for pharmacy in 48 states because they're heading towards delivering medicine into your home. 67% of Prime customers said they would buy prescription drugs from them. Now, Amazon has also released their own wearable system called Halo, which is super creepy. And I'll tell you why it's creepy. It does the things you would think it would do, like heart rate detection, and it's $64, by the way. And it does your activity intensity. But what it also does is they want to measure your weight by body composition. So they want you to take a picture of your body over time so that they can determine your body composition, which is super creepy. They also want to measure how you sound, how your voice sounds. For instance, if you're in a job interview. So if you're at home or if you're at work talking to your boss, it can detect stress in your voice. If you're having an argument with your partner, it'll let you know that you were possibly not polite around them and that you treat your dog better, which is interesting. So you might have thought you sounded affectionate, but actually you sounded bored. Well, it tracks your voice and it'll let you know that. And then it suggests that maybe in the future you can do a better job complimenting her. We all need this in our life. It's sort of like Hal in 2001, A Space Odyssey, where he analyzed the voice of Dave Bowman and decided not to let him back on the spacecraft. He said, "I'm sorry, Dave, I just can't let you do that." Well, we're heading towards a future where a Halo could examine, Amazon would have data on what I buy, my health, and then say, "Ron, I'm sorry, you can't have the things you love anymore," which basically are Jack Daniel's, Chick-fil-A, and Nicorette. But you can see where this is going. They're going to take all this information, aggregate it, and if you don't think they're heading into the enterprise and insurance with this, then you're not paying attention. They're going to have worlds of data, and they're also offering they're also going to be getting into clinics now. Right now, it's called Amazon Care, and if you're an Amazon employee, you can do a video or a chat call on your phone saying that you're sick. They put you in touch with a healthcare provider who will then come to your house or to your place of employment to take care of you. So what we're doing is, you see, we're taking where healthcare is delivered away from the hospital and putting it back into the home or into the employer's location. And yes, they will be getting into health insurance. So Amazon at this time last year was interested in pharma, hospital supplies, and EHRs. You can add clinics and wearables to that. And the Vice Chancellor of IT at UC Irvine said, "Why is Amazon a threat? Because they know more about my health and lifestyle than my healthcare provider." And that's true. And if you combine that information with your EHR, you've got something really powerful, which once again makes them one of the third-body big data players that are affecting where healthcare is going to be delivered. And finally, Walmart. 10 years ago, Walmart said it was going to open clinics, but it was a 10-year experiment in failure. But now they're starting to get their act together. They're building freestanding health clinics at their locations. Remember, Walmart has over 4,000 locations. And what's interesting about this is Apple basically has no footprint in retail healthcare clinics right now, but they have a lot of locations where they could have a footprint. And that's a lot of facilities to be built. And they're doing a doctor's visit or a patient visit for $25. So it's cheaper than the going rate right now. I find very interesting the fact that they're utilizing, if you look at the right, Block's warehouse to make prefab units for these healthcare clinics. All right, if this is the Block's warehouse, but think of that if it scales. If they're able to, prefab medical centers are a growing thing, as y'all know, but once Apple gets their claws into something, they tend to make it happen. And so they're already thinking in this direction. On their website, they say, "We're partnering with Blocks to build prefab centers, prefab healthcare centers." And these are some of Block's other projects right now. What makes this matter is that when Walmart pushes a new technology hard, it tends to become a standard. And this may be the case with their build out of the healthcare clinics and prefabrication. So, in fact, Walmart is the one that gave us the barcode. That's the kind of impact that they have. Also, when you're talking, and that's taking medicine small. Remember how I talked about 500 bed and larger institutions also doing well? Walmart is driving that through its centers of influence, where basically for major surgeries, Walmart is encouraging their employees to go to certain centers of excellence that they have contracts with. All right, because their data indicates that there's better health care and Walmart can get it done cheaper. So they're encouraging that, and they'll pay for you and someone else to actually go to, let's say, Mayo Clinic. These are some of the places that are offered. So they're steering their employees, their nearly 2 million employees, to larger and larger healthcare centers. This is the Destination Medical Center at Mayo, which is a $4 billion project. It's huge. It's like a Disney World of healthcare, and we're going to see more and more of those. Geisinger is doing the same thing. Dignity Health is doing the same thing. So Walmart, not only are they pushing healthcare into clinics, but they're also pushing healthcare more and more to larger institutions, 500 beds and larger. So they're also affecting where healthcare is going to be delivered. All these big data companies are. So it's time for my big finish. I want to read y'all a few quotes, not the whole thing, but these are very knowledgeable people. Half of all healthcare in America will be virtual within 5 years. I can see that. There will be no distinction between in-person and virtual visits. I can see that. Access to high quality care will rely as much on your access to Wi-Fi as it does to bricks and mortar. And this is all part of a huge shift from where healthcare is delivered. And like I said, remember, it's the smaller are getting bigger, like the clinics, and the bigger are getting bigger, like the destination medical centers. And what we've seen is the doctor that used to come to your house with his Gladstone bag is now being replaced by a device that gathers and keeps and aggregates all kinds of data on you. So back to where we started with our three-body problem. At first, we had the two bodies, the patient and the doctor, and that was fairly easy to figure out. And then we involved institutions like a hospital or office, and that's where healthcare was delivered. But now big data is poking themselves into the equation and introducing and affecting the orbit of these other parts of healthcare. Healthcare has been delivered in hospitals, clinics, and homes. And because of big data companies getting involved in this, where each of these is going to be in the future is going to be extremely hard to predict. So the three-body problem is these companies these big data companies getting into healthcare through data and affecting where healthcare is delivered. At first it was at home, then it was mostly at the hospital. Now it's coming back to home and into healthcare facilities, either really big or really small. Thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of your conference.